Boa noite a todas e a todos, bem-vindos ao canal Avistar. Eu sou Erika Zingst-Zaher e eu vou ser anfitriã de vocês nessa incrível programação de hoje. Eu imagino que todos já puderam assistir a estreia do filme Super Beija-flores, mas se você não pôde ver, não tem importância, está gravado aqui no canal Avistar. Esse vídeo foi produzido e dirigido por Anne Johnson, que está aqui hoje à noite conosco. Boa noite, Anne.
Boa noite.
Anne Johnson é cineasta, ganhadora do Emmy, produtora e fundadora da Conversa Studios. Para quem ainda não assistiu o filme, nós vamos passar agora um trechinho da abertura, só para vocês terem um gostinho e entenderem a extrema beleza e qualidade. Vamos lá.
Good evening. I'm sorry.
Nothing in the world is like a hummingbird. Their abilities border on the magical. Though they're the smallest birds in the world, they generate such speed, they appear to alter time. Now, with ingenious science and high-tech imagery, we're beginning to understand their deepest secrets. Beneath their tiny, brilliant feathers, they are kung fu fighters, tender mothers, and some of the most dazzling aerial dancers in all the world. You're about to enter the hummingbird dimension, where life moves faster and shines brighter on these super little birds.
Parabéns, Anne. Esse vídeo é maravilhoso. Olha, eu já assisti, acho que 4 vezes agora. Pessoal, vocês não deixem de assistir e deixar o seu like. Para dialogar e comentar o filme, eu queria chamar a Carol Fernandes. Oi, Carol.
Apareci. Ok. Well, good evening, Anne. Boa noite a todos. Boa noite, Erika. É um prazer estar aqui. E estou super empolgada para essa nossa conversa hoje.
Bom, a Carol, ela é diretora e produtora audiovisual da Banksia Films, faz 12 anos. Ela tem experiência na direção e produção de séries e documentários na Amazônia e, recentemente, ela produziu e dirigiu a série Cantos da Amazônia, lançada aqui no canal Avistar, que eu imagino que muitos de vocês tenham acompanhado. A gente vai ter também a participação da Ananda Porto, jornalista do Terra da Gente, grande divulgadora da observação de aves e natureza, também nossa parceira aqui no canal Avistar, e que, infelizmente, não vai poder estar presente aqui com a gente hoje à noite, porque ela está filmando num lugar sem internet, mas ela mandou perguntas gravadas que a gente vai passar aqui. A nossa conversa hoje vai ser em inglês e a gente vai ter 2 transmissões, uma em inglês no link e outra em português com tradução simultânea da Rafaela Quental, intérprete e também observadora de aves. Boa noite, Rafaela.
Boa noite a todos. É uma honra estar aqui com vocês. Obrigada.
Bom, eu acho que a Carol...
Nothing in the world is like a hummingbird. Their abilities border on the magical. Though they're the smallest birds in the world, they generate such speed, they appear to alter time. Now, with ingenious science and high-tech imagery, we're beginning to understand their deepest secrets. Beneath their tiny, brilliant feathers, they are kung fu fighters, tender mothers, and some of the most dazzling aerial dancers in all the world. You're about to enter the hummingbird dimension, where life moves faster and shines brighter on these super little birds.
Wow. I just love to watch this trailer like 100 of times.
Oh,
Such a
great.
gift in your film, and thank you.
Well, thank you.
I'd like to start our talk. It's just like a great conversation about cinema, birds, science, and everything we love. So I noted that you filmed in so many countries, around 6 countries in Latin America, like not only in Latin America, but you filmed in Canada, the US, Dominicana, Ecuador, Chile, Peru. And I'm just curious, why never filmed in Brazil?
Oh, what a hot question to start with. So I was saving Brazil.
Ah.
Now the next film is going to be all Brazilian hummingbirds, because Brazil is a country unto itself. But I think some of it was I was trying to follow scientists that were doing sort of the newest research on hummingbirds. And, some of that as a producer, just, you get in your own, sometimes a narrow world, perhaps. But my intent in that film was to really feature Latin American scientists as much as I could. And I ended up a lot in sort of the Andean countries, where there is, as you know, such a diversity of hummingbirds. And Brazil was a little daunting for me. It's such a huge country, and the hummingbirds are spread throughout the country. And Brazil at that time, 5 years ago, did not have a culture of ecotourism feeders, if you will, which is a easier way. But I have learned from my time living in Brazil just 3 years ago that I had fantastic opportunity to film hummingbirds in Brazil. And I'm hoping to return to Brazil this fall, if Pfizer vaccine all works out here in America, as we're hoping it will. And really, do a lot more filming of hummingbirds in Brazil. And hopefully with you, Carolina. So.
Wow, good start. Made my day. That's good to know. Definitely will be a pleasure. And I was thinking about all the sequence, and honestly, maybe one of my favorite sequence is the nesting sequence. When actually she's building the nest. We can see a lot of camera positions. We can see like a lot of angles. And I imagine that took quite a long time to film. So I'm super curious to know about this sequence specifically. But before, we've prepared just a little cut of the sequence so we can watch and discuss a little bit later.
Excellent.
Let's watch.
A rufous tail has begun her nest on the underside of a palm leaf. Its spiny defenses are hummingbird-sized branches, perfect for her to weave around. Her materials are fragile and light. She can only use what she can carry on the wing. Soft plant down is wrapped in long green strands of lichen and other plant fibers. Bits of leaves are tucked in. Stretchy and strong, the nest takes shape around her. As she builds the outside up, she tamps the inside down, using her feet to shape a bowl. She binds it all together with layers of sticky spider silk. The project will take her 5 to 7 days to complete. When done, it's a perfect little cup, snug and warm.
Wow, stunning. Just loved.
So good.
Well, we can see that it's a 3-minute sequence, quite long, 40 cuts, a dozen camera positions, and a nest. So it's such a complicated sequence. Definitely, we all agree. So I'd like to know, like, how was the process and how many days filming? There is one thing that I'm curious about is the light continuity. I mean, I was wondering how could you maintain the same light during the entire sequence?
Yeah.
And tell us more about how did you make this sequence?
Sure, absolutely. It's a beautiful sequence because of the beautiful animal who's doing just this incredibly intimate thing in front of us that is so remarkable. From gathering the little bits of palm, there's little bits of material from palm fronds, and then the spider web and all of that. So I had filmed other hummingbird nests, but I'd never captured an egg-laying. The egg-laying actually happens later in the scene.
Wow.
And so I knew that there was more that I wanted to get with this scene. And I asked a friend of mine, Harold Greamy, who is an expert nest finder. He can find a nest of any bird. That's what how he makes his way in the world. And I told him what I wanted to do. So he and I and another cinematographer, Mark Carroll, went to Costa Rica, to La Selva, which is a research station just north of San Jose in Costa Rica, famous for OTS. People train there, and it's a wonderful study site and lots of hummingbirds, forest hummingbirds. So the three of us spent a couple days trying to find hummingbird nests. Some of them started, and then we filmed them, and then they failed. As you know, there are a lot of predators, and hummingbirds' nests are very easy to find. And for snakes and squirrels and other birds, jays love to eat them, the eggs. So this was what you're seeing there was just like the most successful nest we found. But of course, there were other nests that we started on that were successful. Once we found that particular nest, it was relatively close to where we were, just off the trail, close to the study site. And Mark and I set up there, covered in camouflage drapery, this camo stuff that you can find, and filmed her from two different angles. We had two cameras, and then we also had a remote camera that we put up. When the female left, we put a remote camera up there. And she took to us very quickly. She didn't seem that, was not at all disturbed, as you can see, by our activity, but that also meant that we barely moved when we were there for the 10 hours a day. And being in Costa Rica, the light didn't change that much. We had a small little LED that we used that, just filled, we used as a fill light that helped maintain the light continuity as you were looking at. And interesting thing about that nest in the next scene where she lays the eggs is that usually the female will lay an egg, and then the following day she'll lay the next egg. So we got up really early in the dark and started filming the laying of the first egg, and then the next day she never laid. Sometimes they skip. So, but we didn't know. It's one of those things, as you know, as a wildlife filmmaker, you never know if it's going to happen. Maybe it'll happen at 2 o'clock. Maybe it'll happen at 5 o'clock. You just don't know. But that second day, she didn't lay anything. But then the third day, she laid her second egg. So she obviously took to us being close to her and gave us this wonderful, intimate opportunity to observe her. And I think very special.
But do you think that she was aware you were there?
Oh, she could not see us. We were definitely in her line of sight.
Well, that's a question that I had, because here in Brazil, from time to time, we hear rumors about birders that are kind of disturbing nests, and there's this whole discussion about how not to disturb nests and what would be the appropriate behavior around a nesting bird. Do you take any particular care? What is it that you do to make sure that you're not disturbing the nesting behavior or any other behavior?
Yeah. Well, first of all, was to work with Harold Greene, where if you look him up, he is the world's expert on nesting birds at least in Ecuador, and then he knows a ton about nesting birds and just has been around nests a lot. And as filmmakers, I rely on him and his expertise. I ride on his shoulders in a way to understand, what the bird will and will not tolerate. And the worst feeling in the world, I will say, is if you've done something near a bird or done something to disturb a bird and it doesn't come back, or you just worry that it doesn't come back. So we're always mitigating, we're always working against that, not to do that thing. And our instinct in our protocol that we have is, if there's in any doubt, you leave and you back away and, leave for the day. Harold, this particular species is a common bird. It's used to being, it takes to humans very well. As you know, each hummingbird species has personality. This particular species has a personality where it is quite bold. It's not it's kind of a daring and fearless hummingbird. Other hummingbirds are quite timid and shy. So it was a bird like an American robin in a way that you can get close to or closer to. But I think that an abundance of caution is always the first order of business. And, we're trying to bring animals to the public's attention, but that the ethics of doing that rely on, we have to set the standard for that.
When you were describing how you shot the sequence, two things came to my mind, and I'd like to highlight. The first thing is to me, as a filmmaker, a documentary filmmaker, the most amazing thing about documentary is exactly that. We never know what can happen when you are shooting in the field.
Sure.
So in fiction, you have everything super planned. But in documentary, especially wildlife documentary, we never know. You can just get the best scene of your life, or you can get nothing. So this is one thing that probably it's also that movie yourself. What movies yourself to make documentary and not fiction, for example?
For me, fiction has never been my driver. I was drawn into film because of my love of natural history, of wildlife. So, but I think also just that unknowing is just a huge part of the process, as you know, Carolina. And anybody who worked as a field biologist, it's the same thing. I mean, if the animal doesn't show up, you always think, am I in, sort of like waiting for a bus? Is the bus going to come, or am I just in the wrong stop? Is the bus ever going to come? Because once you've devoted yourself to that place, and it in our field, it takes a lot of waiting. I mean, we spend a lot of time waiting and watching.
Yeah, a lot of patience.
And that is sort of the backbone of being a wildlife observer, right? And we're just doing that with cameras. So I think, fiction is a great art form, but it's just not my bag.
Mm-hmm. True. And secondly, I was thinking about, as you just described, it is not fake at all. You were there and just watching the bird build the nest.
Yeah.
So tell me more about it. And also you mentioned about you were working with an expert and how important it is to have an expert to preserve the privacy and the environment, the natural environment of the animal you're filming. So what about filming true things and not in a zoo, or not maybe setting up a nest in a studio? Tell me more about what you're feeling of documentary versus filming in a fake way. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I think that it's an interesting question, because there's a lot of pressure on wildlife filmmakers and wildlife photographers to get the shot. And that shot means money in their pocket. So it's a commercial enterprise at its heart, right? And each individual needs to sort of figure that what that means to them. And I think, to me, it's always been that the thing that drove me into this field was my love for nature, my love for wildlife, and my desire to understand. And if you don't have a sense of what I would call a code of ethics about what you're going to do and what you're not going to do when you approach a wild animal, and what if you're going to bait it to get the shot, or if you're going to, I mean, there are, I would say 90% of wildlife filmmakers are very ethical people and care deeply about animals. And there's a 10% who do horrible things that give our industry a really bad name. And it's those stories that sort of come to the top of news feeds. And that's unfortunate. But I think that, overall the industry self-polices, and we all know if something was done unethically, you can tell very quickly. And so I think that part of the industry sort of gets is not rewarded with contracts and things like that. I do think that there is a world for, especially in the macro world, for creating sets where you can get into the life of a really tiny animal and, create a set in a studio where you're bringing in, beetles and underground beings and showing people a world that they couldn't see any other way. And I think that is, I think that is fine. I think that is a way, a really creative way to explore.
Agreed.
And, you know, so I think, you know, there's no, one of my nephews was watching a show of mine. He's like, well, how's the music? How are the animals hearing that music? I mean, we do all kinds of things to create sort of a filmic world, you know, adding music, adding sound effects, all those things, editing. So, you know, it is a filmic world. We are manipulating reality. And, you know, where you draw that, you know, ethical line for yourself, I think is
Great.
Everybody does.
Great.
So someone is asking again, what's the name again of the guy, the specialist who takes you to the nests?
Yeah, oh, Harold's, you know, his Instagram's going to blow up. Harold Greeny like the color green, but Y and Y at the end. Harold Greeny.
Okay, thank you.
And hummingbirds are super difficult to film because they are so fast. It's really hard to film them because even when you are in a back garden, you can see them, you just woof, they just go. So it's super hard. I know that you used in your first film and now this last film a camera called Phantom. And with this camera is a high-speed camera which makes high speed, so you can really see like in a slow motion movement. I saw an interview when you were describing your feeling when you saw for the first time the first frame you filmed with this camera in high speed. And could you describe this feeling when you realized that actually it was possible to make a film about hummingbirds?
Yeah, and it was overwhelming in a way because I had seen hummingbirds for years and thought about how it would be possible to film them. You know, I had worked a lot in the Andes. My husband is an ornithologist. We have, you know, met in Peru. We spent a lot of time in the Andes themselves. And I had this idea of doing a film called Hummingbirds of the Highlands, hummingbirds in the highlands of the Andes. And I couldn't figure out any way to make that film because at that point we were actually shooting on film. And there was at that point a high-speed camera called a Photosonics, but it was, you know, you turned it on and it just shot and you were done with that 400 mag reel of film and then you had to reload. And it was just, almost would be impossible to shoot a hummingbird that way. So then when this Phantom camera came on and I thought, holy cow, that's what I've been waiting for. You know, the technology met my desire. So when it was really onerous he had to have a computer attached to the camera and I had to have a technician attached to the camera. And I hired the camera and flew it. I was living in Ecuador at that point, and I flew the technician and the camera to Ecuador, and there was a accident on the runway at the airport in Quito. And all flights were canceled. And I thought, oh no, I can't, you know, it was a shoestring budget. And I thought, well, here's my cameraman and the camera that I have paid for to rent for this week. And they're stuck in Houston and they can't get to Quito. It's like, oh no, worst nightmare. So anyway, that eventually resolved. They let air traffic come back to Quito. And when I had scouted these locations around this little town of Mindo in Ecuador, and when the sun finally came out after it was a cloud forest, the sun finally came out and we captured that first shot of a hummingbird in slow motion approaching another hummingbird and just wheeling and revealing behavior that you could not see otherwise.
Amazing.
And I think, you know, now the Phantom camera has become much more popular And there's a lot of ways it's used that you don't really need, it's not revealing anything. And I think we have to sort of step back and like, what do we really need to use it for? And make sure we're using it in a way that, when you slow animals down, that it's for a reason. And with hummingbirds, there's a reason. It's a big reason.
And this question about camera brings me also the idea that definitely nowadays we are able to tell stories that we were unable a few years ago, because technology has bringing new opportunities for filmmaking and also for the scientists. Do you agree?
Yep. No, absolutely. There are a lot of ways. I mean, all the scientists I worked with on hummingbirds, I give them the footage that we're capturing because they're giving me so much of their time, and that's always the balance that we achieve. So they're working with science, studying the hummingbird tongue, and then they can actually see like the macro slow motion of how a hummingbird tongue works. So I think that, there's just a lot that can be revealed with new technology. But I will go back to, it's really hardcore natural history observation, field observation that is the root of everything that we do. Technology can enhance all of that, but if you don't understand how to work in the forest or in whatever environment you're in and find animals, doesn't matter what technology you bring, right? You really have to work. And I work on the shoulders of people who are out there every day working hard to understand their animals and hope to bring what they have understood about those animals to the public.
Yeah, definitely. Even if you have the best camera in the world, what matters is the storytelling. It's the story that you want to tell, and that's why I go to my next thought, that is about the night sequence. So you chose to make a night sequence. It's about around 2-minute sequence, and so tell me more about of this choice to make a night sequence. At the same time that when you think about film hummingbirds, we always think in a colorful, bright sequence. But before you answer, Anne, we are gonna watch this little sequence so we can understand more.
Okay.
As the day draws to an end, hummers face a dilemma. They need to rest. But even asleep, they'll burn too much energy to survive the night without constant refueling. So they do the only thing they can. They shut down and enter a state beyond sleep. It's called torpor. High in the Andes, a giant hummingbird sits motionless, snuggled deep into his feathers. His usual high-speed metabolism slows by as much as 90. His heart rate drops from 1,000 beats a minute to a mere 70. His temperature falls from a feverish 104 to 46 degrees, close to the ambient nighttime temperatures in these high mountains. It's a state similar to hibernation, a winter he endures each night. Far above, a vast universe sparkles and spins. while hummingbirds everywhere, brilliantly conserving energy, wait for dawn.
Amazing.
That's great.
It's cool.
So I have a question for you there. You're talking a lot about physiology of the hummingbirds through the whole movie. How do you choose the science behind your movies? How do you decide where you're going to talk to, or where do you get your information? And what inspires you to pursue a certain aspect of the animals?
Yeah, that's a great question, Erika. So I always think of these films, basically I'm getting like a mini master's in the animal.
Yeah.
So I try to read, I start out to sort of what we call in English wool gathering, like you're just gathering all the stories you can and popular articles, and then you find things that are new and that you think would be interesting to a viewer. Like, wow, I never knew that before. That's always sort of the instinct, right? Like, that's new, interesting, and tells me something about this animal that I never knew. And then you just go into the scientific literature that if I can understand it, I try to. And then, just talking to people. So calling, if I read an article about a scientist and I call them on the phone, and then a lot of times they'll say, oh, you should talk to so-and-so. They're doing really interesting work on flight or physiology. And then when you gather that all together, you have to think, I might have 15 stories for one show, and then I have to figure out, okay, I can't include them all. So in the arc of the show, I can talk about, breeding behavior, a feeding behavior, a flight behavior with hummingbirds, that is, a weird energy saving behavior. So sort of give the whole natural history of the animal. And that's what sort of determines in the end of all these great, let's say 15 stories that you find, when you get down to maybe 6 or 7 that you can include in a 52-minute show, which ones tell sort of the breadth of the natural history of the animal and don't repeat themselves. So you might have 2 that are like, oh, these are both such great breeding stories, but I can only have 1. And, this one is more doable for technical reasons, or, what we talked about before, like some hummingbirds are more approachable than others. So yeah, that's a big part in just sort of the pre-production research side before you ever shoot or get on an airplane or do anything. That's a big part of the show. Super fun.
Exactly, Anne. I was about to mention about this first step, the pre-production. So before we start actually filming, before open camera, we spend months and months talking with scientists, doing research, reading papers, and trying to understand what are the most incredible stories to talk. And this is one thing. I see that you have a lot of experts, a lot of scientists that worked with you, and I was also glad to hear about that you give the footage for them. So it's also like a collaboration. You can have filmmaking helping the science, because they can really have a type of footage that really helps their research.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And then because let's just imagine you're working with someone like a PhD student who has such limited time in the field. And so if you're going to ask them like, oh, I'm going to come and my tripods and all my stuff, and take your time and ask you a gazillion questions, that's a lot.
It is. It takes a lot of time.
So if you can help them, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, because sometimes it's like, well, you're not going to teach me anything new from the footage you're going to gather. But a lot of times you can find someone who really will benefit, and their research will benefit from the footage you're going to gather, and it makes it just such a win-win. You know, if that can happen, it doesn't happen every time, but when it can, it's really great, and forges great friendships. You know, I mean, the fellow who I talked about earlier, Harold Greene, I have, you know, he's filmed a lot of nests, gazillions of nests across South America, but I've been able to film nests and give him that footage, and you know, it just has helped be a win-win for the both of us.
Great. And I think we also would like to discuss about another sequence. I think Erika would like to point a sequence about the coast.
The cost is hummingbird. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's time for us to see another piece of your video about the Costa hummingbird.
Mm-hmm.
It's a new day, and we're no longer in the jungle. This is the Sonoran Desert, and even in the early morning, heat waves are rising. Surely this is no place for a hummingbird. But a pioneer has ventured here. The flash of magenta reveals the little hummingbird to be a costus, a desert specialist. He's tough enough to handle the desert's arid conditions, and the Sonoran is rich in plants that flower all winter long. Sitting high on a favorite perch, he scans the landscape for something special. And there she is, a female costus. Spring is the time to nest before the desert gets too hot. Both birds are looking for a partner. But the choice of mate will be hers. It's up to him to impress her. He moves in close, hovering directly in front of her, rocking his entire body back and forth in a display of flying prowess. Though his back shimmers with green, it's not until we get her point of view that we see his true splendor. He flexes the iridescent feathers of his mantle until they become a glowing mask of violet. Facing into the blazing sun, he swoops back and forth, his face a fiery flower before her. How can she possibly resist him? And yet she does, leaving him to return to his perch. Perfecting his performance is going to take some practice.
That's an amazing sequence, and so there the point was to find the right axis to film the male and the brightness and the shiny thing that he showed to the female, like to find the female perspective on this. And also the issue of sexual selection. And by the way, there's this amazing book, The Evolution of Beauty, about sexual selection birds that I like very much. So can you tell us a little bit more about that scene? What were you expecting when filming this? Were you wondering if she was going to accept the male's display and you could register the copulation, or after all, it was good that she rejected the male?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that's the greatest hummingbird to look at, and Carnival just happened last week, right? Even though it didn't really happen, but it's such a Carnival hummingbird. Yeah. I mean, that gaudy, you know, his little face that just doesn't look like anything, and then it ends up in this clown face. I mean, that's so surprising. So again, that's I worked with a scientist named Chris Clark, who's at University of California, Riverside. And he studies hummingbird displays, especially all over South America. So when I was planning this film, I was asking him of different displays that we could film and that we could actually capture. And this was one that was sort of relatively in his backyard in Palm Springs, California. And when we flew there and drove up to the study site, it was a little grim. I mean, it is in the desert, right? And you don't think of hummingbirds as being desert animals. And they were few and far between, and it was incredibly hot. So there were perches where the males would come, and there were perches where the females would come. And so we would, Mark Carroll was the cinematographer, and we would sort of split up and be like, okay, you aim at that perch and I'll aim at this perch, and we'll just hope the male comes. And it is really a hope the male comes sort of thing. And eventually that was probably 7 to 10 days before, you know, that we got some like okay shots that we thought, oh yeah, that's okay. And then we got the shot where he's really great. And I think that to try, in terms of the sexual selection story, to try to show that display is driven by female choice, and that females are driving males to all that exuberance, is, you know, a subtle script line, but important. Because that is why there is all that beauty. That's why he does that. That is not an adaptive thing where he's showing anything but what females want him to do. So.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Can I just add just a quick question that came to my mind? And is there any story that wasn't planned and that actually is in the film?
Oh boy. There are stories that I planned that are not in the film because they failed. I think there's a rain scene of a bird's like in the rain where they're washing in the rain. That was just because there was so much rain, and which is not what a filmmaker wants. And then I thought, well, this could actually look really great in the rain. And then went down that pathway really a lot and got some really cool stuff of hummingbird bathing using, you know, rain in the best ways. But I think that would be the one that I got. But there are probably 3 scenes that I thought were sort of that what might be in the show, and then they failed, and then they just never panned out. And so we had to pivot to other things.
Cool.
I guess it's time, if Carol doesn't have any other questions, it's about time to call Ananda that sent us 2 questions.
Great.
I think those came in a movie, or
acompanhando o desfile de Beija-flores no Avistar Conecta. Eu queria estar muito presente nesse momento, mas eu vou assistir toda a programação depois. Vou deixar aqui 2 perguntas que eu queria saber um pouquinho mais sobre o documentário, a importância do documentário de vida selvagem para a conservação da natureza, como que isso funciona, qual que é o peso dessa produção, e também as dificuldades, os desafios, como que organiza um roteiro para filmar, por exemplo, beija-flores, que são aves muito rápidas, quanto tempo de produção e como funciona a criação desse grande filme, né, do filme documentário, como que é a logística disso. Queria saber. Muito obrigada.
Right, you're going to translate for me.
Yeah, sure. So her first question was about the importance of nature films to increase conservation awareness. So what do you think what's the role of this kind of movie in the awareness of people about conservation? And the second question was how to film hummingbirds, how do you organize the production, scripting, and everything. So tell us some more about filming hummingbirds specifically.
So let's start with the first question, which is whether wildlife shows have an impact on moving the public's opinion towards conservation, right? That would, am I interpreting that right? I think it's the goal of every wildlife filmmaker to try to influence the viewer. We definitely have a mission. Most people who are devote their lives to this, it's because they believe that there is something that the public would really benefit from knowing about these beautiful animals. And if they just only knew about them, they would care about them. So I think, what we're trying to do, Carolina and I and hundreds of others like us around the planet are trying to open the world of nature in a really appealing and an entertaining way to the public. And whether you never know what you're going to hit. You could hit a kid, or an old lady or some person with a show that just strikes them in a way that they see it on an airplane or, over the shoulder of someone, or they tune in for it. And it could really change their impression about how the natural world works, or the importance of preserving places, or just the interconnectivity of all the natural world. So I think, our impact is probably less than we would like it to be, because look at the world we live in. But if we didn't have wildlife filmmaking, I think we'd probably be in a much worse place. But I think that it's not just wildlife filmmaking, it's environmental education, who takes school kids out on trips, and has them touch the soil, that, becomes a much more tactile experience. So we build on all other kinds of environmental education. Wildlife films are not going to save the world, but they'll increase an understanding of the world that then can, when someone says something to somebody about climate change, or why a bird is important, why a pollinator is important, it will strike a chord. And it all just starts to build in this environmental education world. And I think that, there are places where it really does have a huge impact, and other places where we still have a lot of work to do.
Well, I know it had an impact for me. I mean, that was one of the reasons why I became a scientist in the first place. Yeah, so I know it works.
Exactly. Yes, it definitely works. And and if it's only just, little Erika, when she was, 8 years old, who got interested in being a field biologist, and who then has had a huge impact on other people. So, it's the impact is if you can influence one, but then that influences 10, that influences 100. And I think that's what keeps everybody positive and keeps you going forward, is that.
Yeah, I can tell you that with the web series Cantos da Amazônia, I feel super glad, because as you know, we filmed a lot of sequence in our neighborhood, and I can see that a lot of neighbors, they come to me and they say, "Oh my God, I'm amazed with the birds you shot just here. And I didn't know they are around, because I never pay attention on them." So it's really nice when we can use the power of filmmaking to impact people's lives. And as you said, we will not save the world, but we can at least try to engage people to make the world a better place, and be aware of the importance of each animal, that everything is just a big cycle and everything is correlated. So,
yeah.
Or maybe we can save the world just a little bit.
We can definitely save the world a little bit.
Yeah.
That is definitely a motivator. And I think, it's from big things to little things. I think that, and people watching or filmmakers shouldn't not think that they have to make like the big, planet Earth type show to make an impact. You can make, a 5-minute YouTube video that can be, or a TikTok, whatever, that can reach a certain number of people or people who you would uniquely hit, and that can have just as big an impact ultimately.
Yeah, I know a lot of people here in Brazil who were actually moved by the pictures that came in a chocolate box during the 80s, I suppose, by Luiz Cláudio Marigo, a great Brazilian photographer. And those pictures were like cards that you could glue in an album. And they had amazing information about nature, about life history of the animals, about biology. And I know it also inspired a lot of Brazilians in loving nature or even becoming scientists.
Yeah. It's interesting because we're filmmakers, we're not marketers. But I think that when marketers, if they're motivated or paid to make this kind of influence, they can have a huge impact.
So about Fernandes' second question. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Carol.
Okay. It's just because I can see ourselves having this chat tonight, and what do you think about the women in the film industry nowadays? Now we know a lot of, it's still not the same number of males, but we see now a lot of women working as a director, cinematographer, producers, and executive producers. So how do you see the importance of women and women in the film industry nowadays?
Yeah, I think it's incredibly important. I think mostly for me, it's important because of perspective. I think that in a broad way that females are going to look at stories. If females run the industry, the stories they would choose would be different. When I entered, my example would be this. When I entered this field, I was not interested in predator-prey, filming, lions hunting. That's great. Some people want to do that. Good for them. It's not what interested me. And I think that I also saw that my way in the industry to how I could, when I looked at it, I was like, well, how could I make my way? Because it was so dominated by the Brits, by British people who had this hold over Africa because that's where they colonized the continent. And so that was very easy for British filmmakers, and sort of the genesis of wildlife filmmaking came out of England. And so they went to Africa, which was right in their backyard. So when I started, I thought, well, I'm, an American woman, but what I'm interested in is Latin America. Those are the things that interest me. Those are deep rainforest stories. And those were always people really dissuaded me from that. Like, oh, you can't shoot in the rainforest. It's too dark, and all of this. And it was like, well, it's really the only way I'm going to make my way here, because, the savannah has been claimed by sort of, the guy Brit. So I kind of just toiled in this, American and Latin American soil for a while. And now I think, a lot of people from England are now trying to fill those spaces as well, because there are so many stories to tell in Latin America and Central America. So I think that that's a really, winding way to say that The diversity of voices is great, and women's voices are diverse voices in this industry. And I think, for me, it's just like, I don't really want to watch an animal killing another animal. That's not interesting to me. It really isn't. And I understand that is an entertainment. There's an entertainment value there that people have grown to think that's what wildlife film represents. So I'm always sort of working, not against that, but just a different channel. Exploring how cool science and cool behaviors can be shown that are, I think, infinitely more interesting than an animal eating another animal. I mean, hummingbirds catching flies is an animal eating another animal, but that's pretty interesting.
Oh, that's really good to know. The motivation is kind of different, and also it's great that you're looking at the Americas, at Latin America, and I really look forward for you to come here to Brazil and film the hummingbirds or any other birds, by the way.
Me too.
So we have some questions from the public. So there is this question: how many frames by second were recorded? I don't really know how to translate.
So normally, like normal life would be, we would say it's 24 frames a second in film or video. That's what we're shooting, and that's what the public is seeing on the television, or 24 to 30, depending on the standard. But the hummingbird, I'm shooting that at 300 to 900 frames a second. So that's the difference there that I think they're looking for. So many, many times more. So 24 is the standard, and I'm shooting 300 to 900 frames a second.
And another question: how will this movie be distributed? It would be great for it to be shown at schools, for example.
Yeah. Great question. So the distribution, it was funded by an American broadcaster and a European broadcaster, and their educational outreach is horrible. So if anybody wants to show this in schools or anything, should just contact me and I can send them a link, or perhaps I can use this link. But please use and use for education.
That's amazing, and thank you.
Of course.
So it is about time for us to finish. I don't know if Carol has any other questions or comments, or should like to say something.
I know we need to finish, but I would be here for hours.
We'll have another.
Well, so my last question is: I know that you spent 1 year in Brazil, and how was this experience? Briefly.
Yeah.
Tell me, how was this experience? And
3 years ago, my husband and I lived we were based in Trancoso, but we traveled all through Bahia, and it was so great. We're hopefully coming back in September. So we made so many great Brazilian friends in wildlife places, Erika, Guto, and now you, Carolina. And there's so much to explore in Brazil. And it's such a wonderful country, it's such a warm-hearted, everyone is, I know, it's great. As an American, it's a great place for me because Americans are somewhat cold and not as warm and open as Brazilians. So, and just a wonderful culture. So we can't wait to come back. And we're just hoping with the Pfizer vaccine that we can come back and there'll be many stories to be told.
We are going to be here waiting for you, and it will be just a pleasure to be filming forest with you. Definitely, we are going to take you in a great place.
Let's do it.
And to finish, I would like to invite everyone to go to Cantos da Amazônia channel on YouTube. If you didn't watch the first episode, it's there. So I hope everyone enjoys the first episode, and the second episode is going to be on next Wednesday. So thanks, Zen. Thanks, Avista. Thanks, Erika. It was a pleasure to be here.
Great to see you all.
I also want to thank Anne and Carolina for this wonderful night. It was really a pleasure to talk to you guys. It was amazing. I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Ciao, ciao.
Bye.